And we are live. If you're watching this in the replay, you can fast forward about 15 minutes and we'll be starting. This is the pre-show. And I'm recording. Am I? Recording. So that I can't forget that. Let's make sure that this looks and sounds good. Well, it's all relative, isn't it? Does it look and sound good? Does it sound and look good? Let's turn this way down. Oh, I should probably, let's hit this camera. I'm having, I think I changed some things on my screen on my monitor that I use, and it is looking really weird to me, but I think it looks fine on the stream, and we're about to find out if that is really the case. It looks good on that screen. Let's see when it flips around to the other one. You guys can't see what I'm seeing, but I need to see this on here for me to see if it's something that I need to address. So that doesn't make any sense to you, but it does to me. And that's really what happens. Well, I go to a study group. Yeah, that looks fine. Things are great. Colors are nice. Saturation is good. Sound? It is looking really weird to me. Okay, and the sound's really good, so I'm fine with that. Aren't you fine with that? Hi, everybody. I should probably update some links and let everybody know that I am live. Let's see. Oh, I need this. Okay. Changing the little bar that's at the top of my website to something here. To a /live. My free live security plus study group is right now. Click here to join us. It's the /live link. Update the text. Empty the cache. And Bob's your uncle. Okay. Let's get some things ready here so I can show you really cool stuff later. Like my course notes. There we go. Whoop. Oh, those are big. That's a lot of course notes. Let's get Socrative going. That would be good if people could actually participate. Yeah, I got to fix my monitor, my screen. Okay. Let's start a quiz. Let's do the Security Plus study group. It'll be teacher paced. And let's start. There we go. So you guys should see something if you're in Socrative. How are we doing on viewers? Is anybody showing up today? Well, it's not going to be by myself. Hey, look at all these people. What are you folks doing here? The big tweet and messages and updates and everything will be going out in about, I don't know, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 6 minutes. Okay. Let's get comfortable. Let's move some things around. Oh, you know what I forgot? My vocal zone. We do this every time. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. There's no more vocal zone. Not on that one. There's got to be more in here, right? Yes. So if you're just joining us, we are going to be starting in about 10 minutes. This is the pre-show. If you're watching on the replay, you can fast forward a little bit until you see my head talking. Let's do a camera check. We haven't done one of those yet. There's me. Is that too low? Is that too high? It's always difficult to tell. You know, I've got a mantle above my head. It's sitting on my head. Or is it? There it is. It's sitting on my head. There's the studio. Oh, my screen. Can't see my screen. Nothing to see. Better fix that. I have to put my screen into HD for my graphics converter to convert that properly. So now we have a camera 3. There it is. There it is. And camera 4, which is eventually going to happen. Boy, that's really bright. Wonder if I could really mess up my screen right now. We're gonna try a few things here. Picture brightness. It's got to be the brightness that's the problem, right? It's like contrast is an issue as well. Now it looks a little more reasonable to me. To you, nothing changed. It's exactly the way it was. It probably has some auto feature. I'm using just I'm not using a studio monitor, like a studio display. I'm using just a television. It's a television I use whenever I'm playing Xbox. And of course, I turned up everything for gameplay, and now it looks just awful when I'm trying to see what all this looks like. Still not perfect, but it'll do. Let's get our presentation synced up on the iPad so I can see what's going on. We've got a good presentation today, I think. All right, sees that. Great. That's all working. Nice. Nice. Recordings are going. Recordings are going. We're in good shape. It's almost like we've done this before. Almost. Everybody seemed to like the very first Security Plus study group we did last month. So this worked out pretty well. I need to put the dates on my site for August. The July dates are already on the website. Need to see what people are answering. There we go. Now we see colors. What else do we need? Oh, here. Oh, I know what I need. Hello, chat room. Hello, everyone. Let me get my mic so it's somewhat in a good place. I keep turning the mic off because I have a vocal zone I'm trying to get completely gone. I'm not having good success there. Folks are already in Socrative. You've done this before. like it when I have ideas that pop into my head that I really like. Let's update. I like it when I have those. A little lightning bolt from the sky right into my head. Get rid of that. You can see the chat. Should probably make the chat bigger. Can we move it over a little bit? There we go. The chat was on the other side. There we go. That's much better. All right, we're about, 4.5 minutes out. Things ready to go? Let's hope so. I certainly have the questions ready. We'll see how you folks do. Some of them I made easy. Some of them I made hard. Trying some different things. We'll figure it out. I don't think we finished the check. There's me with the talking head. There's the thing there. There's with this. And that turns out to be the same thing, doesn't it? Does camera 2 not come on? I guess it doesn't. I need to change that. How interesting. I know. I've got all week. I work with this material, this whole piece of hardware. It sits here all week. I work with it, and then today it's what's going on? It's not showing what I thought it would be. How is that even possible? Just the way it works. Okay, let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of that. Oh, finally, the tweet went out. Hello, everyone, for joining. We'll be starting in just a moment. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We'll be getting started in a moment. The streaming is working. The other things are working. This is ready to go. It's really just up to me at this point, isn't it? All right. Turn off those pieces. See if my chat's working the way I would expect it to be working. Yes, it is. All right. Put another link out there. And I think we're about ready. Aren't you? Are we ready? Let's see how this goes. Need some way on YouTube to kind of start the show. I wonder if there's a way to do that. That needs to go on my list. Someone make a note. All right. Let's do a show, shall we? Hello, everyone. Welcome to the June 2015 Professor Messer Security Plus Study Group. This is the second edition of our study group. We've been doing A+ study groups and Network Plus study groups literally for years. And for some reason, I never had a Security Plus study group. So last month we started one. So this is the second study group that we put together. And in this study group, I have a lot of questions that you've been asking me that I've turned around, and I'm going to ask them back to you. And we're all going to follow along live. If you're watching this on ProfessorMesser.com/live, there is not only the live stream, but a chat room. So I'll be going to the chat room every once in a while to answer questions and take comments from there. Later on in the study group, I'm opening up the phone lines. There'll be open phone lines. We can talk about Security Plus or anything else that you would like and discuss those things as well. There's quite a bit that's been going on here. We've got the studio that's now updated with new lighting. I've been moving things around. I was cleaning up cables earlier today, and we're just got a lot of content ready to go for you today. I want to thank everyone who has supported the video course that we have for Security Plus. Obviously, all of my Security Plus videos are available to watch for free out on the internet, but you can also purchase them and have them offline. They include MP3 files, and my course notes come with it, and some other things that you don't get when you're watching on the internet with the live streams. You can find out more about that at ProfessorMesser.com/GetSecPlus. You can also find out what's going on Twitter, on YouTube, by going to ProfessorMesser.com/Twitter/YouTube. Just put a slash and something right after that, and you'll find out where that is, somewhere out there in the world of social media. Also, don't forget that there is a discount available through GTS Learning, our partner. So if you want to learn more about getting 10% off of your exam, why would you pay full price for your exam when you can simply go to ProfessorMesser.com/vouchers and find out more about that? My Security Plus course is one that is now available. Security Plus was, as we're going to mention, released last year. This latest version of it was released not even a year ago. I guess it was about a year ago now. And of course, I have all of those videos available offline. And as I mentioned, you can find out more about that at ProfessorMesser.com/GetSecPlus, because it has all of my videos. It has MP3 versions and audio, so you can listen in the car when you're driving to work and driving home. There's course notes that come with this so that you don't have to buy them separately. And it's just a nice way to help support what we're doing at Professor Messer. But today, I'll be asking you questions, and these questions will be asked on this great online service that I use called Socrative. Socrative is a way for me to ask questions of you, and then you're going to answer questions. Look something like this, so that I'll be asking you, for instance, how long have you been studying for your Security Plus exam? And then I give you a number of options, and we can see this dynamically change on the screen as all of you out there are voting. So you can simply go to Socrative.com, go to the Professor Messer room. So make sure you spell that right, or you're not going to see the questions pop up. Professor Messer, ProfessorMesser. You go to that room name, either in a separate browser screen. There's also apps that you can get for Google Play, for the Apple App Store, the Windows Store, some other pieces as well. The question that I have out there is, how long have you been studying for your Security Plus certification? There's the Socrative information. Go to the student login and log in to the Professor Messer room. And when you do that, you'll see something like this. How long have you been studying for your Security Plus certification? There's a number of options available. It's so easy for this to work, to click on the thing you'd like, and it instantly shows up on this side. And I have a number of questions, Security Plus questions, I'm going to be asking you today, and you've got to figure out what the answer is. So the ground rules, of course, are no asking any questions or trying to find out the answer to any questions on Google. And of course, there's no putting out what you think the answer is in the chat room. This is all something we're going to figure out together, right or wrong. Take your best guess, put it in there. The only time you really learn something is when you get it wrong anyway. So I'm not too worried about those pieces. So the Security Plus exam's been out since April 2014. So it's been over a year now. It is 90 minutes long. You will get a maximum of 90 questions. You might get fewer than 90 questions on the exam. The passing score is 750, but the range of scores is anywhere between 100 to 900. So there's 800 points in there. It's an odd scoring system, isn't it? And we think that every question is worth a different number of points. So you start at 100, and we think for every question you get it right, you're building up to hopefully getting over that 750 mark. I'm not sure why they do it that way, but some very smart person put that together, and there's got to be a good reason behind all of these things, isn't there? It's not just multiple choice, but performance-based questions as well. And if you'd like to know more about that, there's some links on the Professor Messer website that take you to some of the videos and information about performance-based questions. Well, we've got a lot of content to go through today, so let's jump into this and start answering some questions. And all of these questions are going to be specific to the Security Plus exam. So these will be things that you need to know if you're planning to go in and take your certification. Our first question: which of these data storage systems is the most volatile? So you have a number of options available. If you go out to Socrative.com, go to the student login, and go to the Professor Messer room. Again, no answering in the chat room. We've got a number of options. Is the most volatile going to be an ARP cache, archival media, a temporary file system, network topology, or remote monitoring data? One of these is going to be the most volatile. So which one is it? This is a good question, I think, not just for understanding the volatility of data, which is an important consideration for your Security Plus exam, but this, I think, is one where you could even get a performance-based question. So if you'd like to really take it to the next level, all of these data types are indeed part of data volatility. So try to rank them maybe in the order of most volatile to least volatile. That would be a very good performance-based question, I think. I try to take any question and how can I build a performance-based question out of it? And that would be a good example of one. So we have to, of course, know what data volatility is. And then, of course, we need to somehow find out which one of these that I've listed is the most volatile. You think you know? You can go out to Socrative.com and try answering this one yourself. This is a number of different options. In fact, we're sort of split. I'm kind of looking at the answers on the other screen here as I'm showing you the question. And we're kind of split here because there are a number of different items. But this is definitely one of those. And if you haven't gotten the topics from the CompTIA exam objectives, make sure you go out to the CompTIA website and download and use those exam objectives for your study process for Security Plus. So let's see how we did. Which of these data systems is most volatile? Well, we see that we're kind of split in two camps. Nobody really, 5% of us said archival media, 3% said network topology, 2% said remote monitoring data. But we have two options here, an ARP cache and a temporary file system. So we've got 51% of you. So I guess if we had to go with the majority, we would go with ARP cache, but 38% of you said maybe it's a temporary file system. Maybe it's not really an ARP cache. Well, let's look at the order of data volatility. And the reason that this data volatility is so important to know is that if you're coming up on an incident that has occurred, a security incident, there's certain information that will stick around longer than others. So you should probably start your troubleshooting and analysis process and security forensics process with the data that is going to disappear faster. You want to get information and gather that information quickly. Information that might be sticking around for an hour or 24 hours or an indefinite amount of time, you can worry about collecting that data a little bit later. We need to collect the most volatile information first. And so this is a pretty good description of the order of volatility, where the most volatile data, the one that is only going to be around for a short period of time, is at the top of this list. The data that is going to be around the longest is at the bottom of this list. So things like information in a CPU register, those are being updated many thousands of times in a second. That is one where that's certainly very volatile. But you can see things like real-time information used for routing and for ARPing, and information that's in memory is really just underneath that as far as volatility goes. Things like temporary file systems would be just underneath that because it is a file and it has been written to disk. You would really have to go out and modify or delete that file for it to disappear. And from there, we go to disks, remote logging and monitoring data, physical configuration, and archival media. So if we look at which one of our options we had and which ones here are the most volatile, let's have a look at those. We know that from the list that we have, we don't even have any CPU information in here. So ARP cache is one that was second on our list. If you chose A, ARP cache, you got this question absolutely correct. Temporary file system, as we saw, was just underneath that. And if you want to look at what might be next, remote logging data would be a good, would be probably the third that's on this list. Network topologies don't change very much, so that's something that would be next to last. And from the 5 options we have here, archival media is around as long as it possibly can be. That was the whole point of creating archival media. So if we had to choose the most volatile, the least volatile, and the range in between, that's the order that I would put them in as well. In the chat room, blindly guessing is a correct response. That works sometimes as well. So who knows why we choose these different things. But there certainly is one particular answer here that is absolutely at the top of this list, and it would be ARP cache. That would be the right one. Well, that was a good start to this. I think we had even kind of a split there in the number of questions available. So let's do another one. Here's one that is also one that kind of deals a bit with some forensics. Certainly it deals with security in general. And question is, which of these would be the best example of obtaining data in use? So there's a couple of things that we have to know about. Again, I like to create questions where there are multiple things we need to know. So data in use is an important term in security, certainly for determining how you protect information that's on your network. And so the question here is, which of these would be the best example of obtaining data that is in use? And I've given you some options. These options are, would you be capturing data inside of Ethernet frames? Would you be retrieving credit card numbers from memory? Would you be retrieving files from a stored disk image? Would it be copying a SQL database from one drive to another, or upgrading an operating system across the network? Which one of these is the best example of data in use? Now you can see here, just by the answers that are here, if you don't know what data in use is, and it has a very specific meaning, then you could really choose a number of different options here. You really just can't take the word as it sounds. If you think you know what the answer is, go out there to Socrative.com, to the Professor Messer room once you log in with your student login, and you can choose the answer that you think it is. This is one where you really do have to understand what data in use is referring to. And we're going to look at data in use and what these things are. There's different categories of where data lives, what it does, how to protect it. This is one where, in fact, knowing the definition of these is going to be extremely important. We're going to look at those definitions in just a moment. I'm going to give you folks another minute or two, or second or two, to go through and answer, see if you know what the answer is. And of course, you've got a number of different options here: capturing data inside of Ethernet frames, retrieving credit card numbers from memory, retrieving files from a stored disk image, copying a SQL database from one drive to another, and upgrading an operating system across the network. So I tried to fit, I mentioned I gave you some hard ones. I think this is one I tried to make as difficult as possible. In fact, on the exam, you don't tend to get 5 answers to choose from. You usually get 4. So I'm trying to add a few extras in there to give you some things that might be the right one, but maybe not. Or is it? Is it the first one? Is it the last one? So additional options should make you start thinking about these things. Let's see how we did. Which one of these would be the best example of obtaining data in use? And we really went for A, capturing data inside of Ethernet frames. And that's 66% of us said that. 17% would be the second most popular, retrieving credit card numbers from memory. And then we have single digits for retrieving files from a stored disk image, copying a SQL database from one drive to another, or upgrading an operating system across the network. One thing about the Security Plus exam is on every question, there is one answer that is absolutely correct. And they give you a lot of different answers to try to get you thinking other ways than you really should be. And the CompTIA exam, certainly most certification exams, go with a very specific definition of what some of these things might be. So let's talk about the ways that data exists out in the world. One type of data is called data in transit. This is data that is going from one device to another across the network. This could be a wired network. It could be a wireless network. It's now out in the world. It's now across. It's no longer in an operating system. It's no longer subject to the permissions or rights of information that might be on disk. There's no logins associated with this now. It is going across the network, traversing switches, traversing routers and firewalls. But we usually will encrypt this data to try to protect it. So we'll add things like SSL or transport layer security, or maybe we'll tunnel information from one site to another using IPsec. That is what we call data in transit, and there are a number of mechanisms to help secure data in transit. Things like the security of encryption, or maybe firewalls can help us with protecting data as it's transiting. So would this want to be the best way of obtaining data in use? Well, this is data in transit. So if anybody is trying to think about networking, that's a different kind of data process where it is in transit and not in use. So let's look at another type of data, which is data at rest. Data at rest is when it is on a storage device. It is protected by an operating system. There are rights and permissions associated with this usually. It could be a hard drive, an SSD. It could be some type of other storage device like a flash USB drive. There is also encryption you can have for data at rest. It's a very common way to protect data at rest. Maybe it's a whole disk encryption. Maybe you're encrypting database information. Maybe you're hashing information before you store it into a file system. Maybe there's file or folder information. This is also, as I mentioned, permissions in the operating system, access control lists, and whether you're a member of a particular group would allow you access to this data at rest. So the real question we had, though, was about data in use. Which of those options, which of these would be the best example of obtaining data? You can't see because of my head there. Data in use. So which one of these would it be? A, B, C, D, or E? Well, let's find out what data in use happens to be. Data in use is data that's in the memory of a system. It's in current active use. The only way you can act on any data is when you pull it into memory and then begin processing that information. It might be in the system RAM. It might be in a register in a CPU. It might be stored in a CPU cache somewhere. This is something that always has to be decrypted data as well. If you remember back a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago, with the Target hack, where the Target stores had millions of credit card numbers that were taken, Target was encrypting the credit card information across the network. So the bad guys got their malware inside of the cash register itself. And that point of sale terminal was where you had to have the decrypted in the clear credit card number, or else you wouldn't be able to process it. What a great place to begin collecting credit card information because the data was in use. Bad guys simply went in there, picked the data right out of the memory. And it's a very common way when we talk about credit card breaches these days. This is how the bad guys have figured out that this is a great way to be able to grab information is just go right into the memory of that particular device to do it. And the reason they did that is because all of this information across the network has now been encrypted because there are very specific guidelines for handling credit card information. The only place for that is really there. In the chat room, people are going, wow, well, is my information encrypted? Folks are saying the chat room is not encrypted. Had you loaded the page in HTTPS on my site, then it would be. It determines how the overall page is being loaded, and then it will work in that particular way. But of course, chat room information in the clear is generally not something you really have to think of being secure, although I can appreciate someone who might want to keep everything secure and encrypt everything. I can certainly understand that. So data in use would be something in memory. So let's go back to our list of options. Capturing data inside of Ethernet frames. Ethernet frames obviously are going to be outside of memory. They're going across the network. That is data in motion that's going over the network. We have retrieving credit card numbers from memory. Well, there is a perfect example of data in use. If you answered B, retrieving credit card numbers from memory, 17% of you are absolutely correct with that one. Retrieving files from a stored disk image, that would be data at rest. Copying a SQL database from one drive to another could possibly be considered a correct answer, except we're really talking about sending it from one drive to another. It's not really going over the network. It's really something that's in motion as we're sending it. It's not going over the network. It's really going over the bus of the computer. I guess technically you could even say that it was something I could grab out of memory because I can't copy it unless it goes to memory, but we're really looking for the best answer. This is something very common on the CompTIA exams. We need the best possible answer out of the ones that are given, and the one is credit card numbers from memory in this case would be the best possible answer. And you could, of course, send me an email. We can argue about that later. And maybe you think partial credit for that one. So way to think outside the box. There's upgrading an operating system across the network. Again, communication over a network is what you should be thinking with that answer. And in this particular case, that data will be something of data in motion or data in transit. So again, correct answer, retrieving credit card numbers from memory. That would be B. So nice job on that one. I fooled 64% of you. So in this particular case, this is one where those three categories of data are very important, especially from a security perspective, because you're going to be tasked with the idea of, with the task of protecting data. You have to think about, where's this data going? It's going to be, in some cases, stored at rest. It's going to be in motion across the network at some point, and it's going to be in use in memory in other points. And I need to protect the data in all three of those locations to really have this secure. So in the chat room, people are saying, would a SQL database always be encrypted? It very well could be. At least the data could be stored in an encrypted form in the database. It commonly is not, for a number of different reasons. But of course, eventually it has to be decrypted and presented to the application so that it can then do something with it. So there's always places where ultimately the data has to be in the clear. It cannot be obfuscated. It cannot be encrypted. It needs to be something that can be usable. And we can only do that by putting it into memory and then having access to that information. So nice job on that one. Let's do another question. These are getting pretty good. This one has my head in the way, but I think you can make out what we're doing there. This is a very long question, which is, which of these authentication methods would you commonly find in a Windows Active Directory environment? Now, there is only one best answer here. And if you're someone who's really into authentication mechanisms, you know that there are many ways to authenticate to a Windows Active Directory environment. But the question asks, which one would you most commonly find? They're really asking for the most common way of authenticating in a Windows Active Directory environment. So always read the question and understand exactly what they're looking for when they're breaking down something where there could be more than one possible answer. And here are our possible answers. Let's see if we can't even read the question. I made it so long. Which of these authentication methods would you commonly find in a Windows Active Directory environment? Would it be A, Kerberos, B, TACACS, C, Radius, D, LDAP, or E, TACACS Plus? It's only going to be one of these. We're looking for the most common way to authenticate an Active Directory. So let's go through and try to determine what that happens to be. If you think you know the answer, don't put it in the chat room, and certainly don't Google it. We're trying to figure this out on our own, aren't we? We want to be able to look and understand what these different authentication methods are. If you go out to Socrative.com to the student login, you can go to the room Professor Messer. There is only one of these that is the most common. It's very, very clear which one of these is the most common in a Windows Active Directory environment. This is one that you will also run into quite a bit. This becomes very important, not just for the people who are sitting down at their computer and logging into the Windows Active Directory domain, but you as a security professional will be configuring routers and switches and firewalls and intrusion prevention systems, and there might be proxies involved. And all of these systems, maybe a VPN concentrator, all of these systems need a way for people to authenticate. And so you need some central authentication method, or at least some relatively centralized authentication method, so that when somebody logs in over the VPN, they can use exactly the same credentials that they're using on their wired a domain network, exactly the same credentials they're using on the wireless network that they gain access to. And it's a way that you can gain access to the network devices that you are managing. Wouldn't it be nice to just set up a single authentication mechanism, and then you can access your routers and your switches with the proper permissions associated for someone like you? So let's go through these different options. Which one of these authentication methods would you commonly find? Let's see how we're doing with this. And so far, we're sort of mixed. We have a mixed number of authentication methods. If we go with the number one, people have said Kerberos. The next highest, it looks like LDAP. The third most popular answer, 20% have said Radius. And then we've got single digits for TACAX Plus and TACAX. So there's a number of different options there for these pieces. Let's see which one really is used the most for a Microsoft Windows Active Directory environment. And you can see we need to talk about Kerberos. Kerberos is one of the most popular authentication methods out there because Windows Active Directory is the most popular way of doing computing in our corporate environments today by far. And this is a great concept where we log into our device when it's turned on or when we start it up from a standby, and it prompts us for our domain authentication. We put in our domain name information and our password and any other mechanisms to authenticate us. And you'll notice once you do that, you can access all of the resources that are available to you. You can access printers, files that are on different file servers. You can access the internet. You can access all of these different things, and you're never prompted again for a username and password unless you don't have access to something, and then it wants you to provide some additional authentication. But all of the things that you normally have access to, even though they are scattered about the network and are very diverse types of services, you just automatically have access without having to log into each one of them individually. So this is also has a lot of encryption and methodology involved to prevent things like man-in-the-middle attacks. This is something that's been around since the 1980s. Microsoft started using this back in Windows 2000, and it's something that is based on the open standard. A lot of switches and routers and VPN devices have built into them a way to use an existing Kerberos database, which of course could be not even in a Microsoft environment. Kerberos is an open standard, so you might be using Kerberos in your environment with all Mac OS X or Linux type environments as well. This is something that you really do find as being a very useful form of authentication. The name comes from the three-headed dog of the underworld, Kerberos. And you'll find a lot of different types of services that are used to make all of this happen. It uses a ticket granting service. When you log in, you're effectively given this magic ticket that's just for you. And whenever you're accessing other services, your computer behind the scenes presents that ticket. And that machine, by understanding the cryptography involved in the creation of that ticket, says, oh, well, you are indeed who you say you are. I'm now going to grant you access to that. Very useful to have that there, and it's one that makes using a Microsoft Windows Active Directory environment so easy. Well, obviously, there's a lot of information to know for the network, for the Security Plus exam. We've just gone through a number of protocols. There are certainly a number of ports on the network and terminology. In fact, much more than the A Plus and Network Plus exam, the Security Plus requires you to remember an amazing amount of information. And so you will find the Security Plus, you need to take a lot of notes. And if you're somebody who either doesn't like to take a lot of notes or you just want me to take the notes for you, I've already created these types of notes. You'll find them in my Security Plus course notes. In fact, I have them on my screen right here. Here they are. And I've created, this is 36 pages of notes and information that starts right at the very beginning of the exam objectives, and it goes all the way through. I'm just going to scroll down just through a few pages of this. Cloud computing, IPv4 and IPv6, storage area network. Here's all the ports and protocols. This is everything that you have to know for the exam. Somebody this week was telling me about all these hundreds of ports and protocols that they were memorizing. And I said, well, you know, on the exam objectives, they only give you this many. You only have to know that certain group. So that is why, especially on the course notes, it becomes useful to only have to study the things that are important. As I mentioned, it's now 36 pages. I say 35 pages here. It's actually bigger than that. Has everything from all of my videos that you need to know to pass your exam. This obviously doesn't replace a book. It doesn't replace the other study videos that I have available to you. It's something that you can use to reference maybe just before you finally get ready to take the exam, sort of as a summary guide, as course notes to help you through all of the other things you have to know about the exam. If you'd like to learn more about that, you'll find it at professormesser.com/securitycn for security course notes. This is only $10, and every bit of this goes back to keeping the website up and running. And when you have as many servers and things going to keep all of these videos going, it helps so much. I want to thank everybody who is watching and in the chat room who has already purchased the course notes. It really does go a long way to keeping things running, and I thank you very much for that. Let's go now to look at what our next question might be, and it is, which of these would be the best way to identify and stop a sin flood? A sin wagon. No, a sin flood. It's different than a sin wagon. So if you go through the options of these, I've not only, again, made this a two-step question. We really have to know what these things are. You have to know what a sin flood is, and then you have to know how to stop it, and then you have to recognize the different options that I have available for you. One of these is IDS, a WAF, a URL filter, an IPS, or a personal firewall. One of these, again, keywords here, best way to identify and stop a sin flood. So again, we're asking for one specific answer. There may be one in here. There may be multiple answers that you think would be good ways to stop a sin flood, but I'm not looking for good ways. I'm looking for the best way to identify and stop a sin flood. So that is going to be a good example of that to be able to see. So if we start looking at the options, you can answer these options. Go out to Socrative.com to the student login, go to the room Professor Messer, and you would be able to answer what you think would be the best way to identify and stop a sin flood. So I think some people are asking about things that they saw in my course notes as it was going by. And again, that is BGP is definitely the routing protocol used by the internet. There's a lot of questions about that. I wonder what it was you were seeing in the course notes that popped up with that. There is a huge amount of information on the Security Plus exam. I mentioned this was 36 pages long, and it's a really good example of how so much information out on one single exam. And I think it's probably because the Security Plus exam goes so much into the theory of security, the theoretical perspective of security. You don't necessarily need to know the mechanics of how you would actually stop the sin flood. You need to know very broadly what types of tools really would be the best choice to do this. The actual doing it was the real challenge for this piece. Let's see what our answers might be on this one. How did we do so far? Let's find out. Well, we've got one where 54% of you, if we went with the ones that's the highest, have said IPS. But we've got double digits for some of these others as well. There is a personal firewall, got 15%. WAF got 15%. URL filter got 11%. And IDS, poor IDS, only got 8%. Single digits for that. So which one of these things would be able to identify and stop a sin flood? This is something that is very common, not just for a sin attack, which is someone who's trying to initiate connection and doing it so much that is completely overwhelming what we happen to see coming through. It is flooding us. These types of floods are very common to find on intrusion prevention systems. The IPS is sitting on the network. It is watching what's going by. And what's nice about an IPS, because it is an intrusion prevention system rather than intrusion detection system, the IPS will actually stop things like sin floods. There's a lot of mechanisms that you can use to stop these sin floods from overloading a server. There's other types of floods that it can identify and stop as well, things like ping floods and ping scans. You've also got people trying to flood different ports that might be on a particular service. So if you want to be able, in this particular list, be able to stop, identify, and stop a SYN flood, your best choice would be the one that everybody chose. D, IPS would be the correct answer for this. If you're watching this video for continuing education units, you want to be able to send me the code SYNFLOOD. You'll go to the Contact Us link at the top of my website, and you'll send me a note. I'm reading those, so if you want to put anything in there to me, but somewhere put the words SYNFLOOD, and I will send you a digital response that says you indeed must have watched this, and you get your 1 hour of continuing education units. SYNFLOODs are easy to stop with an IPS. In the chat room, somebody said, what about a firewall? Doesn't a firewall identify a SYN flood? And certainly at its these days, the next generation firewall technologies out there can do much more than simply allowing or disallowing a certain port number. They're application aware. They have intrusion prevention systems built into them, so they can absolutely identify a SYN flood. But you'll notice I didn't put firewall on here. I did put a WAF. So the WAF certainly is a type of firewall, but not one that's really designed to stop a SYN flood. It's really designed to stop people from putting in wrong information into an input box. So you've got IDS, which of course can only identify SYN floods and not stop them, and that was certainly part of the question. A web application firewall, which is looking for types of input from a user. A WAF is not going to know anything about SYN floods. It's up at the application level. URL filters they don't know anything about SYN coming in either. They're looking for URLs that are being requested and allowing or disallowing access for URLs. And personal firewalls are on a single device in a Windows type environment. Usually a SYN flood is going to be, you'll need to stop things out on the network before they even hit that device. Once they've hit the device, it's too late. You can't stop the flood. So this is a very good example of where IPS really shines for doing things like stopping SYN floods. There's a lot of different ways to stop a SYN flood. IPS is just one mechanism, and it has many different ways to be able to identify and stop, either based on total amount of traffic coming through, a percentage of SYNs that might be coming in. Maybe it allows SYNs up to a certain point, and then it just starts dropping connections randomly. It's a random early discard, as they call it, a red. And there's many other ways as well to go about identifying and stopping SYN floods. And usually all of that very smart technology is built into something that is like an IPS. If you chose D, you got that one absolutely correct. Let's do another question, shall we? We've got more questions to go. I'm talking a lot about the explanations. I hope that's okay with everybody, because I have so much here. I have a lot of questions, but I want to be sure everybody understands the questions and the answers as well. We have, for instance, this question: what kind of training assessment is determined through the use of a single final exam? So which one of these training assessments is determined through the use of a single final exam? Would this be an assertive assessment, a summative assessment, a formative assessment, a comprehensive assessment, a sequential assessment? It's one of those types of assessments. The summative, formative, or the assertive, summative, formative, comprehensive, and sequential. So one of these would be really like a certification exam. You're studying. There's no type of formal feedback anytime during the study process. You go in a room and you take this single final exam to determine if you know this content. This would be exactly what you would run into with a Security Plus exam. So you would want to answer that in the Socrative.com. You want to be able to go to the Professor Messer room, log in as a student, and you can absolutely do that as well. There is a number of different terms that you have to know, and this one specifically deals with training users and training people on these security technologies. And there's different ways to train, not just in a single exam. Maybe you get exams every week until you finally get a midterm and a final. That would be very much like going to a formal university or college. But in some cases, you don't have that. You study and then you go take one single exam to determine if you know this information. Let's see how we did with this one. How do we do? Let's click, and we have D, comprehensive. Number one by far, 69% said comprehensive. 14% said assertive. Number three would be summative or summative. I really should probably look that up. I believe it's summative. There is formative, which is 4%, and a sequential, which is 2%. So how would we measure someone who got training? This is one where we really have to do these types of checks and measurements. And the two types of assessments that you need to be aware of are the formative assessment, where you are constantly getting evaluated on how well you know the content. This would be like going to a college or university class, at least most of them, where you're going through the training and you're getting constant feedback. And if there are certain areas that need work, those areas are identified and you can study a little more for those particular types. A summative assessment is one where it is effectively just like your Security Plus exam, a high stakes type scenario. You're studying. There's no feedback during the study process. You go and you take a single exam. That final exam or certification exam in this particular case would be the one where it is all a very single study all the way through and take this high stakes exam at the very end of that. That summative exam, number B, would be the one we are looking for. The ones that you need to know are the formative and the summative. So you need to know those two. The assertive, the comprehensive, and the sequential I just made up because they sounded similar to that. They sounded so similar I didn't even remember how to pronounce them. That's how well I did with those. But those are the two you need to know for your Security Plus exam. Those are the two that are listed in the Security Plus exam objectives. So make sure you understand what the formative and the summative are. Make sure you understand the differences between those as well. So that's one where you just need to know the nomenclature. You need to understand the definitions of these terms because they may be presented to you on the exam. Let's do another one, shall we? I think we can run through a couple of others in the time we have left. Here's another one where we have to, again, two-step process. We have to know two different kinds of things. In which of these cases would you use a HSM, or I guess an HSM, given that we call it H here in the United States? The HSM is the Socrative.com. You can go answer these in the Professor Messer room. I've got a number of options for you, except the ones that you're getting on your screen are not the right one. There you go, giving you the right answer, right question. Now, which of these cases would you use in HSM? And now you'll be able to see that. If you aren't seeing that update, I'm clicking around to the wrong thing on your side. So now you can see that it's long-term storage of raw network traffic. Is it a secure encryption key backup? Is it a web server input validation? Is it a real-time network traffic, virus scanning? Or is it identifying and alerting on DDoS attacks? And which of these cases would we use the HSM? This is one of those cases where you have to know what an HSM is, and then you have to know how you use it. So again, a two-step. That's why I'm trying to give you some very similar but different answers in this particular question. You know, looking at raw network traffic, encryption keys, web server, traffic scanning, DDoS attacks, those are all in the data center, or they're all on servers, or it deals with data, or there's viruses, or there's I don't even know. So you really do have to know what an HSM is to be able to do that. So this is one where knowing the content of stop Googling. I can hear you Googling. I can feel it. It's like the force. I know that there's a group of you Googling right now. So just try to figure it out. Go through this. The HSM. It is not a television network. It is not a disease. It is not a type of hybrid car. This is absolutely something that you would find in probably mid to large organizations, because this comes up quite a bit. You could of course see this in small organizations too. Now that I'm thinking about it, just depends on the type of organization it is and what options you need to have available. This is one where answering this one, you probably are going to have to be in an environment where you've used this before or it's come up before. We'll talk about how people use these things. So let's see how do we do on this one. I see we're a little bit slower to answer on this particular one. Well, if we go again with the majority, it would be the 53% of you, 52% of you had said, oh, that's a secure encryption key backup. But 20% of you said this is used for real-time network traffic virus scanning. We have 11% said that it identifies and alerts on distributed denial of service attacks, and single digits is web server input validation and long-term storage of raw network traffic. We're down to 44% on secure encryption key backup. So we're really not sure what this HSM happens to be. So let's find out more about an HSM. HSM stands for Hardware Security Module. This is generally a device. It's usually a Blade server. It probably looks a little nicer than the Blade server that I have in the picture, but it's probably just a 1U high device. Sometimes they're a little bit bigger depending on what they're doing. This is used primarily for cryptography. This is often a separate device like this one. It can be part of a server or service by adding a separate card to a very specialized cryptographic device. It can be used for key backup. And this is a big problem in large organizations is you have all this encryption going on. Who handles the keys? How do you protect these incredibly important private keys? Because if you get your hands on the private keys for these servers, you effectively now potentially have access to this data. So you have to keep the keys very secure. And an HSM was created, which is one of the reasons an HSM was created, is so you can have a way to keep these keys secure, but provide access to the key in a secure method as well. We want to give the right people and the right services access to these security keys, but keep everyone else out of those. These can also offload a lot of functionality. Cryptography requires a lot of CPU cycles to be able to get this running, certainly more, relatively speaking, than non-encrypted information. And so having a dedicated set of processors that are doing nothing but cryptography can offload and keep that CPU load off of things like your web servers and database servers. This is usually used in large environments. You've got clusters of these HSMs. They are redundant connectivity to the network, redundant power. They are a critical piece of these particular networks. So you want to be sure that if you're doing anything with cryptography that needs this level of security, that you're using an HSM. So if we go back to our answers, in which of these cases would you use an HSM? If you chose, the 44% of you that chose secure encryption key backup as B would be absolutely correct. HSMs are not used for long-term storage of raw network traffic, although there are devices and systems out there that you can get that have multi-terabyte storage arrays that are doing nothing but capturing all of the traffic going over the network, but that would not be an HSM. Web server input validation is usually done by a web application firewall or a WAF. You've got real-time network virus scanning. That's usually done by a device like a proxy or next-generation firewall that's designed to do that type of scanning. And identifying and alerting on distributed denial of service attacks is often an IPS or, again, a next-gen firewall to be able to make that happen. Now, the question in the chat room from Rob Sandberg is, will CPUs be able to somehow manage that overhead, or will we always have discrete HSMs? Well, it will depend on the type of encryption that is in use and how many CPU cycles you currently have available on your web servers. Generally, keeping those particular functions separate allows you to do more with the web server and have more capacity for the web server. So by having a single HSM, you may be able to decrease the number of web servers you're having to spin up, manage, and maintain. And that's certainly something that's pretty important when you're getting into very large environments where they have thousands of servers. If you can decrease the number of servers just by 10%, that's a huge load. You may not even have to hire additional people, and a huge cost savings for something like that as well. The HSMs, you'll run into them if you start doing anything with this high-end cryptography, certainly. Well, there's a lot of information to know on the Security Plus exam. And when I start looking at all of the different things you need to know, there's a lot of terms. There's a lot of information in my course notes, for example, where you need to know certain functions like our summative type of exams, what might be different there, or understanding what an HSM might be certainly becomes very important. But the exam is not just going to ask you for things that are going to be multiple choice. You may be asked for things that you have to be able to actually change firewall settings, or you have to be able to put in order a set of data and put it into its order of volatility. Or you have to understand the difference between data in motion and data at rest, or how you might grab information using a protocol analyzer. All of these things require some type of real-time lab work to be able to understand exactly the concepts you're dealing with. And sometimes taking this idea of something that's conceptual and somehow getting it into something that's actual can help you really solidify what that particular topic is. And that's where I look to GTS Learning, who has these great live labs where the labs are already set up. There are virtual environments running Windows and Linux and other operating systems out on the net, and I simply connect to them inside of my browser, and I'm able to access and use those particular labs. So I can be anywhere with really any modern browser and be able to go through these labs. They're always available. You don't have to have any special software loaded on your computer. You don't have to have any special add-ons. They use HTML5. So it's something that most browsers these days already built in. There's nothing extra that you would need to do. There's also a Java option as well. If you have an older browser, you can simply run Java and it works as well. This is, for example, I think I have one running here. These are a set of labs. Here's a Linux box that's used in this particular lab, and I access it from this Windows machine, and I simply click on the Windows machine, and now I'm connected there. So this is one where the entire lab is one. It's on the other screen. I can step through and show you what the lab looks like. But now I'm on my Windows environment, and I can step through what all of the different lab settings are for this one. It's a full-blown Windows. This is not an emulated environment. This is one where I really am running Windows on my screen. It's all running somewhere else in some other lab in the cloud. It's all doing something associated with that. I can go through this process. You can see domain controllers are popping up, and I can run through all of the labs associated with this particular piece. There are exercises that I can go through, and this is a network vulnerabilities topic. And here's the lab that's set up with the domain control of the Windows device, and there's some servers in this environment. It's a Kali Linux server. And you can go through now and understand exactly what you need to do. Here's step number 1. Let's use Nmap. So we're doing some port scanning and some system mapping, trying to figure out what's on the network. It takes you through understanding Nmap. So when you go to your Security Plus exam and you're in the position of trying to understand what is port scanning, what is these ping scans, what are these floods we're talking about, you can start getting a perspective of that by using some of these labs. There's also a special price on these as well. If you went to the GTS Learning site, it would cost you more than if you use my special link, which is professormesser.com/seclabs. And that will take you right to the GTS Learning site, where you get a very special price of $99 to be able to have access to this for a year. If you don't know if this is for you or not, this link will also take you to a place where you can register and use it for absolutely free for an hour. So try out the lab, see what's there, see if this works for your style of learning. It might be something that gets you over the hump and gets you solving and getting correct answers on those performance-based questions. I'll also thank the folks at GTS Learning. They've been a supporter of Professor Messer for a very long time. I use their books to write my videos. So all the video content you're seeing is coming directly from a GTS Learning book. And when you get these live labs, you also get access, online access to their book content as well. There's also some sample exams available that are also included with this. What more do you need? Go out to professormesser.com/seclabs and you can try this out for yourself. Thanks again to GTS Learning for their support as well. Well, I've got more questions for you. Let's keep going. I've got a few minutes left. We could probably get a couple of more of these in. This question, again, deals really with understanding these types of terms that we deal with all the time. And one of the questions, a lot of the questions I get from you about this, the Security Plus, are about cryptography. And so I wanted to put some cryptographic terms peppered throughout the study group today. I think we've been able to get a few of those, and this is another one of those. This is non-repudiation. This is an important concept in security, an incredibly important concept in security. Without non-repudiation, we wouldn't be able to do a lot of the things that we do today in network security. So which of these would be an example of non-repudiation? Would it be a digital signature? Would it be SSL encryption? Would it be a multi-factor authentication? Would I be analyzing and visualizing big data? Or would it be implementing a TACACS Plus server? Which of these would be an example of non-repudiation? This is one where don't Google. You need to answer this one. Go out to Socrative.com, go to the student login, and go to the Professor Messer room and see. Just guess. If you don't know, go through the different options and try to figure out which ones perhaps don't fit the idea of non-repudiation. And then, of course, you'd be narrowing it down. We aren't phoning a friend on this one. We aren't doing a 50-50. Maybe you can do a 50-50 in your head, or at least it's not 50-50 in this case. It's 60-40. It's because there's 5 options. So, but you got the idea. Go through the different options you have available. Is it digital signature, SSL encryption, multi-factor authentication, analyzing and visualizing big data, or implementing a TAC ACKS server? TAC ACKS, that's when the aliens came from Mars. Yeah, so if you answered it the first time around, you may not see that pop up again on Socrative. Sorry about that. I clicked too many clicks that time. I need to be careful with what I'm clicking. Let's see how we did. Well, 60% of you, 61% said digital signature. The next highest number, multi-factor authentication, was number 2 at 25%. Single digits for SSL encryption, analyzing and visualizing big data. And 0% of you, the poor TAC ACKS server, is getting no love from the non-repudiation idea. Well, that's too bad. Well, non-repudiation means that when you put something out there, there's really no denying you did it. You're really telling the world, I really did this, and it's verifiable. So if you're writing an email to someone, you could apply this concept of non-repudiation. And when they receive the email, they can confirm that this really is what you said. Now, what's important, especially in security, is we want to be sure nobody's changing things between point A and point B. And so if anybody does make a change, maybe somebody goes into that email and adds a 0 to the end of that dollar amount, when they receive that and do a validation, the validation will fail because this device or this content has been checked for non-repudiation. This is really useful in cryptography. We want to be able to have integrity of the information, to know that when we receive the information, it's exactly what was sent from the very beginning. This also provides a proof of who sent it. So you can't have somebody pretending to be this person. You can really confirm that it really came from this person using these concepts of non-repudiation. This is done by using something called a digital signature. This is where you would be digitally signing the information that you're sending out, and you're signing it with your private key. When it gets to the other side, the verification process is used to check this information by using the public key of yours, which of course everybody has access to. You're the only one with the private key. You've got the private PIN that you're signing. Everybody else is confirming, oh, it really was written with your very special PIN. Nobody else could have written this because nobody else has your private key. What's also nice about this is that the content that you're protecting with this non-repudiation does not have to be encrypted. It can be in the clear email being sent from one side to the other. The piece that's at the bottom is this hash, this digital signature that's added to the bottom. And that is what you're checking. It's reading through all of this email and going, yep, everything is exactly the same as what was sent from the very beginning. So if we're concerned about non-repudiation, the best option here as an example of non-repudiation would be a digital signature. If you answered a digital signature, you would have gotten that one absolutely correct. We've got SSL encryption here, and although encryption is one way to send information from one side of the other, there is very limited amounts of non-repudiation in there. In fact, it's very common for many environments to proxy SSL information. It's very, very easy to do that if you have the right certificates in place. So SSL encryption doesn't guarantee that the information wasn't changed from one side to the other, although it's a very good way to at least help along that process. In this case, digital signature would be the best example of non-repudiation. Multi-factor authentication is sort of a way to think about non-repudiation. The problem is that you really don't have a way to verify completely, at least not as completely as a digital signature might be, but it gets you a little bit further down the road. And analyzing and visualizing big data have nothing to do with non-repudiation, nor does the implementation of a TAC ACKS server. So if we're looking for the best example of non-repudiation in this list, and you always have to go with the best example on your exam. Always go with the one that jumps right out at you, that there's no doubt that this is the example that's really being asked, and in this case, digital signature absolutely fits that particular description. So let's go through one more question. We got some time left in the hour. We got a minute left. I say that minute we're going to go with. We're going to ask another question. I'm going to fit it in here. We may go a little long on this one, but that's okay. Which one of these best describes 3DES? What is that? What is 3DES? I'm going to act stupid because I want you to answer this one. Which one of these best describes this odd term 3DES? I've got a number of options for you. Is this 3 times more complex than DES? Maybe that's what it is. Is it a FIPS compliant standard? It has been replaced due to a cryptographic vulnerability, or this is used in WPA2. One of these best describes whatever that thing is. 3DES. Sounds like a video game system. Hey, did you get the 3DES system from Nintendo? No, don't think it's that. It's one of these, though. There's something about that we need to know. So one of these particular answers is the best description of this 3 times more complex than DES. FIPS compliant standard, been replaced due to a cryptographic vulnerability, or used in WPA2. It's got to be those. Or E, I don't know, as they're saying in the chat room. It's got to be one of these, isn't it? It's got to be one of those. Let's see what it really does happen to be. This is one where again, in the answers that you can see here, there's cryptography involved. There's some type of privacy or some type of encryption involved. And so one of the questions I get every month is, I want more cryptography. So this is a good example of providing you with more cryptography. Let's see how we did. Which one of these best describes? How do we do? Wow, we're all over the place. So we've got 36% of you, so the most number of you have said it's 3 times more complex than DES. 30% of you said it's been replaced due to a cryptographic vulnerability. 18% said it's a FIPS compliant standard, and 14% said it's used in WPA2. We got double digits all the way through the line. So what is 3DES? Well, it's triple DES is what that is. That's what we call it. It's really a combination of different things. This comes from a very early type of cryptography called DES, and it's a new version of that, or a newer version of that, called triple DES. That's why the 3 is in front of it for triple DES. It's been around for quite some time. This is one of what in the federal government of the United States they call FIPS, which is the Federal Information Processing Standard. It was created by IBM for the NSA, and it is a very, very solid encryption standard. It uses a 64-bit block cipher, so it's sending information in these small blocks. It's very commonly used when you're sending information over the network, and you need to chop information up into small pieces and send it all across the network. And that's what those block ciphers are good for to some point. Triple DES, it's more than just 3 times more complex than DES, because we're effectively taking DES and we're encrypting it 3 times. This does not mean that it's 3 times more complex. This means that it's, I guess, 3 to the exclamation mark, or even more, actually, because of what we're doing with this information in here. The more you go through and encrypt something over and over again, the more difficult incrementally it becomes to be able to use this. These days, you see a lot of people instead using AES, which is what is used in WPA2. We're not really using triple DES on most things anymore, unless it's something you're connecting to in the federal government, because you can make triple DES, and it's very large types. You can make these really be quite a useful and secure method of sending this information back and forth. So if we look at these answers that we had, it is not 3 times more complex than DES. It's many more times more complex than DES. It has not been replaced due to a cryptographic vulnerability. It's not used in WPA2. It's AES that's used in WPA2. And if you chose B, a FIPS compliant standard, that would be the one of these that best describes triple DES. So that is one where when you start jumping through trying to figure out and looking at these encryption methodologies that are used, it's triple DES you'll see on things like IPsec tunnels. What type of encryption would you like to use across these IPsec tunnels? Well, let's use triple DES. or let's use AES. There may be other options available to you. If you've gone through this study group today and you're wondering, where is all this information? These are things I've never seen before. Should I really be expected to see these on my exam? The answer is absolutely, because all of this information came directly from the CompTIA exam objectives. If you go to professormesser.com/objectives, you'll get access to this, or just go to that Google machine, type in CompTIA exam objectives, and download the objectives for the Security Plus exam. There is a lot of information that's in there, and you want to be able to use it as a master checklist to be able to gather this information. This Security Plus exam objective list should be what you go to before making your decision on whether you're ready to take the exam or not. Go through the list, check off the things you know. If there's something you don't know, then you'll know you need to study a little bit more before getting that exam ready to go. This is one of those where incredibly important when you start working through and understanding the things that are going to be important on your Security Plus exam. I know I always tell you in the study group, go do your exam objectives, download those exam objectives, print them out, use them as a checklist. You should do that. It's incredibly important. Well, we've come to the end of our hour, but I wanted to, of course, thank you for joining us for this crazy little study group that we do. We do one every month. And of course, you can go out to the calendar on the Professor Messer website to find out when the next one might be. Of course, remember, I've got my course notes available. If you'd like to see those, you can find them at professormesser.com/securitycn. And if you ever want to find me on Twitter or YouTube or Google Plus or Facebook, type in professormesser.com/ and then one of those words, /Facebook, /Google Plus, /Twitter, /YouTube, and you will get there absolutely as well. Remember to save 10% on your exam by going to professormesser.com/vouchers. And again, my thanks to GTS Learning. You can learn more. I've got the wrong thing here. I did that last month. It's not Net Labs, it's Sec Labs. See, I did it again. We're going to do this in real time. There you go. See, I can work with the live room. Sec Labs. There we go. Now it'll be there next month, and I'll have it right. And again, thanks for you for joining us live. We wouldn't be able to do this if you weren't here answering the questions, the chat room talking about these questions, and us being able to do that. If you are watching live or you're watching the replay, you might want to stick around for the second hour of this, where I've opened phone lines, and we'll go through and answer any questions you might have, and I'll flip through some of the questions you sent me throughout the month as well. I want to thank everybody for joining us. We'll see you next time on the study group. Thanks, everyone. Those were some pretty good questions this time, I think, weren't they? I think we got some good ones in there. I need to get the phone lines open, so let me work on that. Well, the answer for the last question was a FIPS compliant standard, B. If you answered B, a FIPS compliant standard, you would have gotten that one absolutely right, which very few of you did. I got you on that one. That was a tougher one, I think. Let's go. Let me start up the phone lines as soon as I can remember how to do that. We do this every time, don't we? Where I'm trying to remember, how does this work? I have to click a lot of things and then log in and do those types of things. So let me host a show. There's a whole online cloud-based system for this. I was considering having my own set of phone lines here. I don't know what I was thinking. Why would I have my own set of phone lines? That doesn't even make sense. Why would I just use it in the cloud? Outsource as much as possible. That's the idea. If you aren't doing that, you're not doing it right. And this, and did I do it right? I will do this. And do that. Oh, don't say that. Do I have to do that again? Oh, there we go. Okay. So now you can call in. If anyone would like to call in, you don't have to. But if anybody would like to, you can call 855-785-RJ45 to get in on our studio line. These are open phone lines. You don't have to talk about anything related to security if you don't want to, or you could talk all about security if you would like to. It's been an odd week for security. The last couple of weeks have been really interesting with some of the things folks in the chat room were mentioning. Should the government really, should they really be doing triple deaths if they keep getting hacked into? And as it turns out, triple deaths was not the problem, was it? They got right around all of those pieces and got in there. In the chat room, what Windows domains and Active Directory experience do I have? I have managed Active Directory environments. Mostly it's been integrating other systems into Active Directory environments that I go back to. So I've done a lot of Kerberos implementations, integration with LDAP to the Active Directory databases, being able to integrate authentication mechanisms into that. That's primarily what I've done with Active Directory. Becomes very handy to have those pieces and knowledge of that. I'm glad I don't have to manage a Windows network. That's a difficult thing. Although if you know Active Directory, you understand the trust models and understand forests and trees and the way the different domains interact, you could do very well in IT, because that's a big mystery for a lot of people. Sometimes hard to find the person who needs that piece of it. Google's received in the chat room. Dale Katz writes, Google's received a lot of scrutiny lately regarding privacy issues such as reading Gmail. Well, that's been going on for years. I don't know really lately. There are no privacy issues with nobody at Google's reading your mail. Do you think privacy issues will ultimately make their way into Security Plus exams in the future? And they are to some degree. First, Google is automating the process of going through your mail. A machine read your mail, but I think you could even say the mail servers that are sending your mail from point to point are reading it, if you want to go to that level. There's nobody reading your mail at Google. Google will give your mail access to authorities that have proper rights to do that have gone to a court and have gotten a subpoena for that information. They will absolutely hand it over because they're legally bound to. Just as if they showed up on your doorstep with a subpoena, you would have to provide that information to the court as well. But Security Plus does have a bit of privacy in it. Really, it's the encryption part that is really around the privacy. If you want to be private, things need to be encrypted. And in fact, in my website, I've gone through this last week kind of cleaning up my website because I've been toying with the idea of making the entire website HTTPS, just everything encrypted. This is what a lot of websites are doing these days, so that everything going over the network is something encrypted. The only time it's in the clear is when it hits either the server or the end station on the other side. There is a lot of people thinking of doing that. So when we talk about privacy on the Security Plus exam, it is almost always revolving around the encryption mechanisms that are there. I don't think a lot of the broader privacy pieces, well, there's a little bit more privacy information on there. There is some people are doing, I think, more with putting it into law, somehow making some type of compliance that you must maintain. So things like HIPAA is a perfect example. That's on the Security Plus exam. HIPAA is the healthcare privacy mechanism that keeps all of your medical records private. So it's a very good example of where privacy does fit into the Security Plus exam. I think the Security Plus exam would do well to stay away from some of the more political aspects of privacy. Especially privacy and rights, you're getting into more legal type issues, and it's difficult in the environments we have today, even on the internet, for people to really understand the nuances behind privacy and the legalities associated with it. Even myself, it becomes a bit of a challenge to be able to understand those pieces. Whenever you start working with anything dealing with privacy, it's a very sensitive topic. People don't want their private information sent out to anyone else unless they have given specific rights and permissions to do so. So that's where I really see Security Plus probably pretty good on the privacy front. I think that exam is just right with the privacy tools and the information you need to know for an exam like Security Plus. Justin C is asking, how much does it cost to get your site fully HTTPS compliant? Is it expensive? Isn't Google pushing for all sites to be encrypted? Well, this is a combination of a political issue and a practical issue. And you can probably go both ways on this. How much does it cost to get your site fully HTTPS compliant? Not much, because today I could flip a switch and we'd be all HTTPS. So what it really means is I have to go to my site and make sure that there are no links on my site that are specifically pointing to pages in HTTP. Because if I do that and I'd make my site all HTTPS, that won't work right. You'll have to redirect somehow, and you'd rather have people go directly to HTTPS. Also, your browser knows that if it's trying to load something on an encrypted page, you've probably seen this before. It's on an encrypted page. There's something on that page that is not encrypted. It pops up a warning and says, whoa, there's something on this page that is not being encrypted properly. So you need to be aware of that. And that's very scary, even if it's just a graphic. So you have to make sure that everything is being referenced either very generically, so that there's no specific reference to HTTP, or you must force it to always load as HTTPS. So it's really just me sitting down and going through and making sure things like my templates and my pages are set up to point to the right things. It took a day to really go through and test a few things and make sure it would work. And I did a few pages to make sure they work. Everything works just fine. So I don't have a lot of older applications that don't know about encryption, and it's really not that difficult to get it going. You really just have to make sure you have the right certificates in place so that when you're hitting my site with a browser, it properly is showing you that there are no errors and nothing is being loaded in the clear, and that the certificates are popping up without any types of warnings or messages. So it's not really expensive. Now, what I'm concerned about, of course, is that there's more overhead to do HTTPS across every page. I mentioned in the study group, there's more CPU cycles that are required. So there's more, at least initially, when you're setting up that initial sync key to go back and forth, the symmetric key, you're using the public key type of cryptography to create and send symmetric key information. And at that point, it's much less of a CPU overhead. So you do have to be able to do that. Yes, right now on my website, you can't HTTPS, you just can't go HTTPS to any page on my site and have it work. I have to configure my site specifically for that. Now, the pages where you're buying a study guide, a course notes, my videos, all of those pages are HTTPS and have been from the very beginning. So I'm not saying that my site is completely in the clear. It is not. It's very secure along those lines. I come from a security background. Of course, I'm going to encrypt that information. So you really have to look at all of the other pages. And the argument is, well, why would you encrypt the page that's just you showing a video of the OSI model? Why does that need to be encrypted? Well, I guess it doesn't need to be encrypted, but part of the question that was asked by Justin C. isn't Google pushing for all sites to be encrypted? They have said publicly in presentations, we would like all sites to be encrypted. And there is the Google ranking that's used to provide people visibility to your site. They say if you do encrypt your site, you get a small bump in that, what they call Google juice. So you get a little bit more Google juice if you encrypt your entire website. I really don't think that's the reason. I'm not doing it because of Google, but having to deal with a combination of HTTP and HTTPS adds a little more management to my site. Why not just make everything HTTPS? Then I know exactly how to configure my site, how to set it up, and how to manage it. So part of it is just me being a little bit more easy on the management side of things. And plus you get that nice benefit that everything going back and forth is going to be encrypted. So that's very useful. So yeah, it's really just a cost of my time to do it, to make that happen. Very, very simple in that scenario. But there's certain pages where I've turned on and I have forced those pages to be encrypted. Something I can do on my web server is I can pick a page and I can make that page always be encrypted. And I might try this week with things like my A+, Network Plus, and Security Plus index pages, because those are hit a lot on my site. So maybe I'll turn one of those on to force encryption, and we'll see what happens. Does anybody see a problem? Is the site loading properly? How are the CPU cycles associated with that? Those types of things are very, very important, because I want to be sure everybody can connect to the site, that everybody can access the information on the site. It wouldn't do very well for you and for me if I created a site that people couldn't access. That kind of defeats the purpose. So it's just sort of an idea right now of, can I do it? And why don't I set up my site so it's a little more compliant if I wanted to do something like that? Because you never know when you might need to flip a switch for something like that. And there's a lot of capabilities. Yeah, there's some nice utilities like on Firefox, on Google Chrome. There's some nice add-ons that you can get that if you go to a site that can work via HTTPS, it will automatically force your browser to use it. So if you go to Facebook, it will automatically force Facebook, although I think Facebook's doing everything HTTPS these days. But if you go to a site and there's an option between the two, it will always encrypt your data, which is kind of nice for those particular pieces. Security-wise, it's just a nice bonus to have it there. But you get into this other piece of it for those security people that have done this before. When you're dealing with SSL certificates, there's different kinds of certificates. There's the normal SSL certificate that just turns your lock green. And then there's the extended validation certificate. So not only do you get a little green lock, you get the name of the website next to it. So there are little things that cost extra money, and there's different ways to implement those on the network to be able to do that. So it's very useful to sometimes run those things when you're working with them. So that's what I've been doing. I've been sitting on my website. I loaded up a page. Oh, that didn't load properly. Why? Oh, because I forced my menus on my website to load without encryption. I pointed them to the HTTP part of the site. Well, that's dumb. Why am I doing that? Get rid of that. We'll use just relative references on my website instead of forcing that. Don't know why I did it that way to begin with, but there you go. Probably just because I copied and pasted from the address bar without thinking that someday I will need to be able to decrypt that. So that's one of those. So Dale in the chat room is asking about, speaking of privacy and speaking of encryption, he says the bank he uses, in this case SunTrust Bank, and I think my bank may be the same way, does not permit the use of special characters in a password. Doesn't that make our passwords much more vulnerable? Why would they even do that? Well, I'll tell you why. There is a reason why they do that. So does that make our passwords much more vulnerable? Yes, it does. When you limit the number of different kinds of characters that could possibly be used in a password, it does make them technically more vulnerable. Now, of course, with banks, it would be very hard to brute force the password from a bank because they're going to disable your account very quickly if somebody tries to brute force it over the web. So in that particular case of an external brute force attack, having just normal uppercase, lowercase characters and numbers is just fine. There is also the concern, of course, that somebody's going to gain access to the passwords. So at that point, it depends on how are they storing the passwords. And if they're storing the passwords in a hash with a salt, then it's going to be much more complex for somebody to go in and reverse engineer what that particular password happens to be. So we can make a determination based on the size of the bank. We can hope that indeed they must be storing their passwords in a salted hash, certainly, to be able to make that happen. Especially when you consider that they are limiting the type of characters, and therefore if somebody wanted to reverse engineer the password, there would be fewer iterations for them to hop through. But having at least a long number of characters that can be uppercase, lowercase, and numbers is still pretty complex. You can come up with a pretty complex 15-character, all very different password that probably is just as secure as using special characters in there as well. Now, the reason from the very beginning they decided let's not allow special characters is because they were afraid they wouldn't be able to filter out characters that would allow someone on the outside to gain access to the database. And we're talking about SQL injections in that scenario. You know that in SQL injections, they make a lot of use of that reverse apostrophe character because that breaks out of the logic and allows you to put your own SQL code into a string of information. So instead of putting your username, you use your own code to go into that view and gain direct access to the database. That's fantastic. Well, you can think that they've already done tests for this, but what they're saying is that if we happen to miss it, at least this won't be an option because we're already cleaning the input to only be characters and numbers. And we're getting rid of any type of special character that could possibly escape out of the process and access database information directly. And if you look at my video on database injection, I show you I inject into a database from a login screen. So that's what they're trying to avoid, is that particular scenario. They know they've covered it now. They're just worried about the future. And by completely eradicating those special characters, they don't have to worry about that particular one. Assaulted hash is one where you have taken a password. If you look at my video on hashes, you take a word and you hash it and you get a hash out of it. So passwords are commonly hashed. If I take the word password and I hash it with SHA-256, I get a particular string of characters. Now for the bad guys, if they get a hold of that string of characters, they can simply run through a hash of all of these numbers. In fact, there are huge tables that have already been created, so they don't have to do the calculations. They can go to a huge table of every SHA-256 hash for every word in the dictionary, and then some. And so all they have to do is say, is this hash matched anywhere? Yes, it is. It's easy to do a search for something like that. Yes, it is. It matches the word password. Well, that's his password then. But if you add some additional text onto the end of it, so you add on not just my password, but you add on the first character of my name, of my first name, and you put those all together, that's assault. And then you hash it. Well, now you can't go to a table because nobody has assault of every word plus an extra character hashed in. You're going to have to start at the very beginning and do your own calculations. So it slows down the brute force process. And you'd also have to know how they're hashing with this salt. You have to know how the salt is put in there. You can't just get a list of hashes. How did they come up with this hash? Maybe it was the first character of my last name. Maybe it's the first character of my first name. Maybe it was some other number. So the bank knows what the salt is, but the bad guys don't. And that's really another piece to add into the mix to make it easier to prevent a reverse engineering or brute force of that particular hash. Is it true we use symmetric key encryption because using private key encryption is notoriously slow to encrypt large bulk data? Not just large bulk data, it's not notoriously slow. It's actually pretty quick. But when you're talking about real-time communication over the web and the limited number of CPU cycles available on a web server where many people are hitting it all at once, the CPUs on your machine are probably fine. It's on the server where it has to perform this encryption and decryption all the time where it's a problem. And the private key, public key, private key encryption mechanisms use more CPU cycles to encrypt and decrypt information than symmetric key does. So that's why you tend to use symmetric key for these web type communication going back and forth, and you tend to use the private key, public key encryption to encrypt large blocks of information or to encrypt the symmetric key that you're sending to each side so that you can then communicate using that symmetric key. That's a very common way to see symmetric key and public key being used simultaneously is in SSL on a web server. We do that every day. Is PGP a good encryption platform? I guess it's a good public key, private key encryption mechanism. Sure, it's been around forever. It's well vetted. It's been a public and open source project, so we can see the code in most implementations of this, and we can see how it's using the encryption, and it has maintained the test of time. It's one that has been a very good platform to use because there's not really been a cryptographic vulnerability with the way PGP works. There have been cryptographic vulnerabilities with some of the protocols that have been used with PGP in the past, but we don't use those anymore. Just like we don't use WEP, but we're still using wireless networks because we're using WPA. It's much stronger, WPA2. With that, you can absolutely go back and watch any of my study groups that I've ever done. If you go to the website, professormesser.com, the right-hand column, there is a category list, and that category list under A+, you'll see study groups. Under Network Plus, you'll see study groups. Under Security Plus, you will see study groups. You'll see the list of them. Now, obviously, for Security Plus, you're only going to see one because this is our second one. So you won't see many more than that listed there. You'll see the one, but they're always going to be available on my website for replay. You can go back in time and watch some of the older ones. Before we were even doing Q&A on my A+ study group, we were just taking questions and put questions up there and answering questions. I kind of like the Q&A. I like the questions and which one is it, and we'll figure it out. Why was it right and why was it wrong? I think it gets people thinking. This month was a little harder than most, wasn't it? We were going through quite a number of those, trying to figure out this month. I tried to throw some in that would make it harder. I think the Security Plus exam needs to be a little harder to study because there's just so much on there. So that's important. That's useful to know that piece. So let's go to our list of questions. I'm going to pull these up while the chat room is going through those pieces and see if I can pull up some of those. Wouldn't a behavior-based intrusion detection / prevention system take long to collect the data, and that wouldn't be practical compared to signature-based IPS in a production environment? The vast majority of IPSs out there are signature-based. A very, very minor, small number of security devices out in the world are behavior-based. There are some very powerful behavior-based systems. They're generally used for flood attacks or for flood prevention because it can understand what's normal for sins on your network, what's the normal amount of port scans you have coming in, and it can look at a very dramatic change, which is different than an IPS, which kind of has lines in the sand. If you have 10,000 sins a second, maybe that's a warning, and when you get to 50,000 sins a second, it's critical, and we can start reacting to it. Those are the most common thing that you will find. I think that's where you really get into understanding how people are using these technologies. But the vast majority of IPSs and the vast majority of flood guards are that kind, where it's a line in the sand and you're setting a bar, which means you have to figure out, where am I today? And you have to figure out, where do I want to get warned and where's a critical problem for me? And there's some good rules of thumb, but it really does need to be customized for your environment. Every environment's just a little bit different. For IPSs, I come from a background of next generation firewalls, so I did that for many, many, many years. So I can talk to next gen firewall capabilities, the IPS capabilities in those, the URL filtering capabilities, the cloud-based malware detection, the IPsec tunneling, and more, and much more. So it's an exciting environment, exciting technologies to be able to use, and I think everybody should learn as much as they can about all of those. It really is changing the way that we're protecting our networks and working with them. Let's the replay, by the way, if you plan on looking at the replays, do count towards continuing education units. In each replay, I give you what the continuing education keyword is for that month. And you can absolutely, CompTIA does allow you to use those replays as continuing education, because I can validate that you watched it because you're giving me the keyword. So that's what becomes very useful whenever I'm working with this. Let's go through your questions. I want to sort these questions out by a few different things. And let's sort those pieces and give me this first and click a button. So we went through a bit of wireless encryption today. There was a little bit on the Security Plus exam. I think we talked a little bit about the encryption mechanisms, and I mentioned AES being used for WPA2. That's an important thing to know. I think it's important to know, what are the encryption mechanisms used in WPA? What was the encryption mechanism used in web? So there's your homework for next time. What was that? What were we using? Because it wasn't triple DES. We know that because we know about triple DES when we started working with that. So that's another one. When you start looking at trying to understand what are the types of encryption I should know about, that's one of them. I guess I should go check back and make sure. I've got this phone line up, and you're more than welcome to call, but it only helps if I'm actually looking at the phone lines coming in. If I can find it. What did I do with everything? There it is. Be useful if I had those available for me to look at on my screen. Here we go. There's a lot of things going on here. Let's go through more questions that you have sent me. First, I need a beverage. Pardon me a moment. Everybody drink. We've got, oh, it's nice. Let's go through some other questions you sent me throughout the month. I've got a list of them right here. Back to that triple DES I was talking about. Yes, it does. It is one where you're not just tripling DES. It's more than it's more than a triple of DES. Because of what we're doing to the information. It's nice to have that fundamental DES technology, but when you're combining it each time, you're making it more than double the difficulty by doing that. Because you would have to first go through an entire brute force once, then you'd have to go through an entire brute force again, then you'd have to go through an entire brute force a third time. And that doesn't make it 3 times harder. That makes it much harder because each one of the keys is different every time. That's why triple DES is much more than 3 times more difficult. It's much, much, much more difficult, which is why it's valuable, which is why we're using it still today, because it's there, and we're doing it that way. In my experience, are most firewalls today operated hybrid mode? Not sure what that is. Are they still configured and specialized like packet filtering, circuit gateway, etc.? Most firewalls today in a medium to large environment, and really even small environments for those doing it, are now updated to the next generation firewall technology. So people are firewalling based on applications. They're identifying what apps are coming through the network and allowing or disallowing based on apps. They're still using port numbers to some degree if they want to be able to do that. They certainly can do that. And they're almost always adding on additional security capabilities like antivirus and anti-malware, IPS functionality. Why wouldn't you? It's built into the firewall. It doesn't slow down. We're going to turn it on. Stop anybody doing buffer overflows. Stop database injections. Stop anybody doing floods. We'll simply do that. There's people, of course, using those as IPsec gateways at the same time. They are URL filtering at the same time. They're doing cloud-based malware detection on executables at the same time. It's all happening all at the same time on the same device. And people have been doing this for years and years and years. We talk about next generation firewalls like there's something brand new. They've been around for 7 years now. This is technology that's been solid and installed in people's environments for 7 years. So it's something it's sort of normal at this point. If you're just using a firewall, if your definition of firewall is a packet filter or a port filter, then you're 7 years behind the technology. You're not even close to knowing what this is about. Oh, Benny's getting Facebook ads for Palo Alto Networks Next Gen Firewall. So that's anybody ever wants to know anything about a Palo Alto Networks Next Gen Firewall, I'll be glad to tell you. That's where I was for 6.5 years. So that's one of those that's because you did a Google search for it and they stuck the little cookie on your computer. And now I do that. I go out and I look at, I go look for something. What was I looking at recently? It was something for the studio. So in the studio, I've got, it's like a boat. There's always something to buy and add on to this. Fortunately, nothing's breaking like a boat, but I just added some new light pieces that allow me to hang the lights from the ceiling. They're called pantographs. So I've got a rail system up top and I can move the lights around now and get it just right. And there is these pantographs. I have started looking around, where can I buy some of these? And of course, go to Facebook. I see ads for pantographs. I go to a third-party website. I see ads for pantographs. That's the beauty of Google. That is their secret sauce. That's what makes Google the powerhouse in online advertising, is that right there, which is what I prefer. I'd rather see ads for things that I'm interested in buying rather than seeing ads for things that don't apply to me whatsoever. And that is absolutely why they keep showing that to you. I keep seeing it, probably for obvious reasons. I keep seeing Palo Alto Networks Next Gen Firewall ads. Matt's asking in the chat room, is there any advantage to using an IDS over an IPS? There used to be, because there was obviously limited number of resources available on these devices. You would think it would be lower cost. You would think it would be lower overhead. But these days, everything's done in hardware. So if you're detecting it, there's no additional or negligible additional overhead to say, please also block that bad thing as well. If during the time I was at Palo Alto Networks, there were people that set up their firewall to just detect vulnerabilities, and there was no good reason for it, I don't think, because all you had to do was click a button and we could have stopped those vulnerabilities. Literally a check mark and it would have stopped them. That's how easy it is. But I think it was a mental thing. They were kind of old school, and they were of the opinion that IPS has more overhead. It's going to slow down this device and I'm not going to use it. Like, okay, well, it's your dollar. You tell me how you'd like it set up. We're setting it up that way. You might want to think about turning on some of that later on. And I don't think they ever did. The vast majority of my customers that were running this technology, the vast majority were absolutely blocking, absolutely turning on. And in most cases, you can turn on different severities. Maybe you want to block critical, but not block informational. Those types of things. You've got control. So why don't you control it? Why don't you block things that undoubtedly, that 100% you're absolutely sure it's bad stuff? It makes sense. And I think most people are doing exactly that and being able to make that happen. That's one of those that is a technology that's sort of an older technology. IPS, signature-based IPS, it's kind of easy now. It's a signature. We're looking for it in data going by. These firewalls are doing identification of credit card numbers within data. They are doing SSL decryption. They are able to put together a series of different settings to determine, is a certain type of information coming through. So I can do regular expression matches inside of a firewall to look for customized data and allow or block that. Why wouldn't I do that with a relatively simple IPS signature? Of course I would do that. It makes perfect sense to go about doing something like that. And these days, a lot of the firewalls out there are doing that kind of thing. They don't all work exactly the same. They don't all have that same ability to maintain performance. Some of the older firewalls out there do have that overhead where you would never want to turn on IPS on some of those older legacy firewalls because they do suffer. But all the modern stuff, you turn it on and it runs like a champ. Literally, I'll give you an example. On a next generation firewall out there, if you turn on the ability to scan for a single antivirus signature, it runs exactly the same speed as if you turned on 1 million antivirus signatures. So why wouldn't you turn on all 1 million antivirus signatures and stop known viruses? It's exactly the same speed. So there's no decrease in speed because it's all done in hardware. It's all just blinding fast these days. Multi-core processors, multiple multi-core processors. It's amazing. Just amazing technology. Let's go back to some of the questions you sent me this week. A lot of general interest questions. There were some networking questions. We're not going to spend too much time on the networking questions, but I do have those set aside for the Network Plus study group. And if you want to know when the next study groups are, they're in the calendar on the Professor Messer website, professormesser.com/calendar. You can also, on the right sidebar of my site, there's a calendar setting there. You can see those too. If you scroll down far enough, you will be able to make sure that those are there. Are there any disadvantages to completing Security Plus before Network Plus? No, you can do them in any order you'd like. In fact, I did my Security Plus first, I got my Network Plus, and then I got my A Plus. It's a series of interesting events that caused me to follow that particular path. But there's no disadvantage to that. There's a little bit of overlap between the Network Plus and the Security Plus exam, but not a lot, just a little bit. So that's one where I think running the Network Plus certification is not really necessary for getting and studying your Security Plus certification. So if you're on the edge, you're trying to figure out, do I get my Network Plus first? I really need my Security Plus. Just go get the Security Plus. There are a lot of government agencies that prefer you have your Security Plus and don't really care about the others. So a lot of people start with the Security Plus exam for that very reason. And if they're doing it, anybody can do that for that. So it's one of those where it comes in handy. I have, and people are already in the website are saying that can't be possible. You turn on one signature and a million signatures and it goes exactly the same speed. It goes at exactly the same speed. I don't even know how to say it any differently. It goes exactly the same speed. Do you mean that it goes exactly the same speed? Yes. I do mean that it goes exactly. There's no decrease in speed. There's not. There's not decrease in speed. It's all in hardware. The hardware is going faster than the network. If the network was going faster, you got a 40 gig network, 100 gig network, well, then it might be different. But the subsystem that handles the signature matching is faster than the network. There you go. No decrease in speed. It's crazy. I have run Windows 10 yet. In the chat room asking if I run Windows 10. I have. I might even have it right here. I got it running in this. I have one of the older betas, I think, running on here. I absolutely loaded it up. Tried it out. I think some of the screenshots from Security Plus might even be Windows 10 in there. Do I have Windows 10 still on here? No, I moved the file off. I needed the space on my SSD, so I moved it off. I was doing some stuff in Windows 7, but I was absolutely running it, and it's I run Windows 7, I run Windows 8, I run Windows 10. It's nice. It's nice. It's a nice upgrade to Windows 8. I think that Microsoft has got their feet under them with Windows 10. I think they understand as a company what they need to do with Windows 10. I think the change in management has been a benefit to them. For many reasons, not just in Windows, but a lot of the other things they're doing, a lot of the ways they're doing it. Microsoft's a big company. They got challenges. They got stuff going on. But I think they are now much more focused on their operating systems and making that work. That's a pretty important one for them. The Windows operating system, incredibly important for them because everything else comes from there. Obviously, they make a good bit of money on selling Windows. They make a lot of money on selling Windows Server. And Active Directory is the glue that keeps all of this together. Microsoft doesn't really talk about why their business model works. It's Active Directory. Microsoft is an Active Directory company. They have Windows. What is Windows? I don't know. Active Directory is what they do. And the ability and power of them to manage enormous networks with Active Directory in the core is what the secret sauce is. And if they sell products all around that, ideally they're server products, there's some significant revenue to be made from that. And they've got those cool goggles now. So, you got to have that. Justin is asking in the chat room, is it true even though you have WPS disabled in your router, if it's still broadcasting that signal, if your router is WPS switch, you're vulnerable whether it's on or off? I don't think that's the case. I think once you disable WPS, it's disabled on your router. I don't think anybody can use the switches. Or what are you still doing with a WPS router? Does anybody still have those with the physical WPS switches on the front of it? I think in most cases it's turned off, or they've got firmware that turns it off. I can't imagine the switch, but if it has a switch on the front, that's the only way WPS would work. You're still pretty good shape, aren't you? Because your switch isn't outside, so you're in a pretty good place there for those pieces. And you're not, if it's turned off, you're fine. Because no intruder can come in. If an intruder is in your house clicking the WPS switch, you have bigger problems, don't you? There's a larger issue that you should probably consider. Not really a problem. And all of the new routers, and I say new, really the past couple years forward, all of those new models have no WPS in them. They got rid of it, threw it out. It's not even an option from there to be able to do that. For those pieces. This comes up quite a bit when we talk about security and on the Security Plus. Lawrence is asking, to be successful in security, do you have to know how to program? No, you really don't. I mean, a lot of people say you have to know C++, you have to know Python. That's the big one now, Python. How are you doing anything in IT without any Python knowledge? Because you don't need Python knowledge, quite honestly. You don't need C++. You don't need to know how to do programming unless you're going into an aspect of security that deals with making applications more secure. There's a small niche in security and an important niche in security that deals with application development and how to make applications not be susceptible to buffer overflows, database injections, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There is, for somebody who's doing network security, your job is to set up a firewall, an intrusion prevention system, to have a SIM that's all the information's reporting into and creating reports that are coming from the SIM, to be able to set up IPsec tunnels, to be able to watch what traffic is going in and out, make sure nobody's sending an Excel spreadsheet out of your company that has credit card information inside of it that's in the clear. You want to be able to make sure nobody's visiting websites that have malware, that are known malware locations. You want to be sure to protect anybody from sending information to sites that are insecure. All of these things are the purview of the network security person. None of that has anything to do with programming. You don't have to program any of those. Now, it certainly helps if you can do some Perl scripting, if you knew some kind of language that you can use to automate some of these processes. That's really useful. But Perl scripting and C++ are two very different worlds. I can do a Perl script. They look awful. I should find one of my old Perl scripts around here somewhere. It's awful, but it worked, and it ran, and it worked every day. And the thing that I built it for, it did exactly what I wanted it to do. So it wasn't pretty. It was probably not even close to being optimized, but it's Perl. I just needed to log into a device, transfer a file, download something, stick it in a backup folder, and finish. That's where programming can help you. A lot of people will tell you Perl scripting is not programming. Well, I guess that's true. It sort of is and it sort of isn't. I get your point. But you don't need to understand the nuances of an object-oriented programming language to be successful in security. Most people doing network security that have those job descriptions I just described, they don't do any programming. They're doing good to keep up with Linux. Doing good and some people will focus on, I'm going to grab Linux and I'm going to run some Nmap scans. Great. Well, now they're the expert in Linux and Nmap scans. That's a far cry from knowing how to program those things. It certainly helps if you have an interest in that. You've programmed some things, you understand what the buffers are and why a buffer overflow occurs, and you should understand broad concepts around those things, certainly. But it's not important that you know how to fix a buffer overflow in network security. There are people in security that do that. They're very niche. They're over there and they handle that piece from an application development perspective. There is a relatively large push to get people doing more Python, and certainly Python is a very big part of cloud-based systems, and being able to automate the process of our new virtualized environments. And yeah, that's useful to have that, but it's not a requirement in the least for traditional network security roles. There's quite a bit of that. In security and being able to do that. Is it best to put an IPS or IDS in front of the firewall or behind the firewall? Well, it kind of depends on your philosophy. I think most people will have the firewall as the first line of attack. It's really allowing or stopping certain applications from flowing. If it gets through that, let's look through the data to see if there's anything bad inside of that. Some people like putting an IPS on the outside of their network just to see what's going on. They want to see how bad are we really getting scanned, because most firewalls are going to stop a port scan. They're going to stop a ping scan. That's why your firewall is there. But they might have an interest. How much are we really getting? Are we getting a lot of ping scans, a lot of port scans? Should we be putting some type of system ahead up at our ISP that are blocking certain things, or certain countries that we should be blocking? That's a very common thing to do. It will just block every IP address that's registered in a certain country and will prevent those from coming into our environment. That obviously doesn't stop someone who really wants to hit your box, but these automated processes, it can stop a lot. I've done that on the Professor Messer site. There's certain countries, I just block those countries because I know there's nothing good comes from there. They don't speak English. All my information's in English. A lot of what's coming from those sites then is not somebody surfing my site. It's somebody who's attacking my site. So I'll just get rid of those right off the top. There's many, many ways to get through that these days for those pieces. So the vast majority of people put their IPS behind, and not IDS. Nobody's putting an IDS on their network. IPS. Nobody's using IDS anymore. You're putting it behind your firewall, on the inside of your firewall, so that the firewall takes the brunt of the attacks, and then you're looking through what the firewall is allowing in and out to see if there's perhaps something further inside of that we should be concerned about. Very useful to have that there. And of course, everybody's on me for me writing bad code. I'm sorry. I just write bad code. I don't have good penmanship. I don't write good code either. So that's those pieces. In chat room, Douglas is talking about simulation questions, the performance-based questions from the CompTIA exam. I think the live labs from GTS are a good way to prepare. I think going through your books, a lot of the books have labs in them. Take advantage of that. Now you have to set up your own environment to use that, but there's some nice labs and hands-on things inside of your books, or they give you some things to try to make that happen. I think those would be good. But use the exam objectives as your checklist. The performance-based questions aren't asking you for things that deviate very far from that. For instance, I gave you one today. We were looking at the volatility of data, and I said, pick the one that's most volatile. But you could get a performance-based question that says, put these in order from most volatile to least volatile, and then have you do it. Well, that's a performance-based question. You didn't have to set up an infrastructure. You didn't need a file server. There was no reason to have a database server running for that. There's a number of questions that you will get, performance-based questions that I'm sure are going to be just like that. So that's one where it's useful. Now, I don't think there's any command line you have to worry about. So really everything is more, in what cases would I use these technologies? And I think using the technology helps you apply back towards those particular questions. There's quite a bit, people in the chat room, I don't like coding at all. I dislike coding. I don't mind coding. I think programming is an interesting logic exercise. I've done quite a bit of programming. I kind of stay up on the latest development languages. I want to try them out. I've tried out Swift. I want to go through that and understand how does that work and what's good or better versus Objective-C. I want to drill into those and get some hands-on and work with them a bit, and I have. I'm just found that I'm just not very good at it. So I try not to do a lot of it. Like, thank goodness that you never see code. You just see the result of the code. So I'm pretty happy I don't have to deal with too much of that along those lines. There's other questions. I got a few minutes left here. We can go through. My voice is holding out for those pieces. Let's all take a sip and go to the question, shall we? Let's find another one. What are tips for securing your home network? It's one of the things that's asked of you on the Security Plus exam. I think there's a big emphasis around small office, home office, and for good reason. There's so many more of those out there these days. So you want to be sure to every place you can have security, you should have it. So on your desktop, there needs to be antivirus and anti-malware. And these days, it's included with the operating system. Why wouldn't you have it installed and running? Your personal firewall should be running. You should have certainly a firewall to the internet, something that's going to protect you from people coming in from the outside. You would never plug into a non-routed internet connection. In fact, your ISPs these days, like the Comcast and Time Warner and cable providers, they give you a device that's a router. They don't want you directly connected to the internet, and you don't want to be. But because it's a small office, home office, the amount of security should match the type of data that you're securing. If you have private information, your financial information, you should make sure that you're putting that perhaps in an encrypted part of your hard drive, or that you've got it somewhere where you can't access that off of the internet coming in from that side. But generally, the security controls in your operating system, the security controls that are in your router and your firewall, it's all you need. You're up and running. You're plenty safe. I don't think I've done anything too fancy here. I don't have a big fancy firewall in my studio because it's one person, me, connecting to the internet. And I know where my data is. I know my firewall rules, which is very simple. Block everything. There's nothing coming inbound into my studio. I am connected to other parts of my house, so I don't have direct connections to those. I'm going through a separate VLAN for those pieces where I can manage what traffic goes back and forth between them. I think it becomes very useful for those to be able to do that. The pieces that are the most important, I think, are just to make sure those are turned on and enabled. I moved into a new place and did not change the default password on my router. And I had someone come in and do some work setting up some cameras, some security cameras. And when they were done, they said, well, I've got your security cameras installed and I set up your router so that you can access the cameras from anywhere on the internet. I said, what are you talking about? What'd you do? Well, I set up some port forwarding so you can access that. I said, what are you talking about? You're using the default login on the cameras and you just gave the internet access to my security cameras. Is that a problem? Do you think that's an issue? You think you thought, oh yeah, I guess that's bad. Like, yes, do not set up port forwards, but I had left the default login on my router. So first thing I did was change my authentication, knocked them out. Second thing I did was turn off the port forwarding. And third thing I did was change the password, the default password on the security system. Then I turned my port forwarding back on so I can access it from the internet. But it's a step of things. You don't want to enable the wrong kind of hole through your security controls without having the proper security waiting for you on the other side. I think that's very useful for those pieces. So that was the idea from my perspective and being able to think about security, especially a security environment like this. There's a lot with security here. We did talk about intrusion detection and intrusion prevention. We talked a lot about that this month, didn't we? I had some, we really ran out of time. I've got some other questions I think for next time that deal with certificates. I think probably because I've been working a lot with certificates over the past week. And it's something you work with all the time when you're working in security. We talk about things you need to know. That's one of the things you need to know is the certificate. Did I change the port number on my port forwarding? No. The port number is not security. Anybody with Nmap can find out if a port number is open. It's worthless to change the port numbers and make it harder for you to use the app because at the end of the day, they can find the port number anyway. And they know exactly what's on the end of the port number because Nmap has already told them what service is on the end of the port number because it's already queried it. So no, I didn't change the port number. That is a security through obscurity, which is not security at all. So what I did was make it so that this port took them to a particular IP address, and that IP address is very secure. You have to have a very long username and a very long password to get into that security system. So that's where I see that from that perspective. So that's one whenever I start looking at security, that's a real focus for me. Oh, and I was talking about certificates. If you're doing network, add to that list of things as a network security professional, you're dealing a lot with certificates for those pieces. I think that's where I really start getting into this, start working with them. That's an important piece of this, to be able to know the intricacies of certificate authorities, maybe setting up web server certificates, what size the keys should be on the web server certificates, what type of encryption mechanisms should be associated or understood by the server that you're installing the SSL certificate on. You know, those are the things that are important in working with those. That's why I really emphasize that in the Security Plus videos. And for that reason, they are part of the exam objectives. And I think that's a good piece as well. So Matt's asking in the chat room, beyond the CompTIA objectives, what exactly is a sticky port? And I don't think it's part of Security Plus, but Network Plus sticky port is part of the exam objectives. There are videos I have on sticky port. They're referring to not a TCP or UDP port number. They're talking about the port on a switch. And it's a security method so that the first person to connect to a port on a switch, it remembers the MAC address. It sticks it. It's a sticky MAC address. And if somebody else was to unplug that and plug themselves in, they wouldn't gain access to the network. There's a lot of options around that, a lot of things you can change associated with that, but that's the basic idea. It's a security function on a switch that allows you to limit how many devices can access the network through that particular interface on a switch. So that's very common. It's something Cisco calls it port security, and we're referring to the port of the switch that they're working with. It's a sticky port. Sounds delicious. I would like a sticky port right now, like a big bowl, just sticky port. I don't know what that would look like. Sounds good. There are other questions I got since I have a couple minutes. Mrs. Professor Messer has not walked in yet and told me to get off the stream. So we're going to keep this party going. I'm not ending it with that one. We're not ending it with that one. Boy, there's a lot of people just copied and pasted exam objectives in here. You can go to the videos for those. Since we talked about Nmap, I think that'd be a good one to do. And you saw in the live labs, I demonstrated one of the things they have you do is run Nmap. If you have not done that, you really should. Nmap is available for Windows, for Linux, for Mac OS. It's at the command, run it at the command line. There's some very simple how-tos. Do not scan somebody else's network, scan your own network. But get an idea for what Nmap can do. Because once you understand the intricacies of Nmap and understand what a send scan is versus a ping scan, for instance, and when you start to understand what a service scan is and an operating system scan and how they work, you start to understand what the bad guys are doing and how this information going over the network can make something more secure or less secure. So that may be something to take away. If you had to try something out this afternoon after this is over, go download Nmap, scan your local network, see what it finds. You may be surprised at what it finds, and then run an operating system scan against what it finds, and then run a service scan. There's your three things. Do a normal default scan. You may be able to figure out what kind of scan that is. Run a service scan, run a normal scan, a default, run an operating system scan, and run a service scan. And who knows what you're going to be able to find from there. And see how much of it is correct. See how much of it might not be. You may even be able to contribute to the Nmap project if you've found a particular service that it did not recognize, which would be very unusual. I want to know what you find. That would be in that case. There is a question. Matt's asking, any possibility of doing a video series for CCNA? I would love to do some Cisco videos. It's on my list of things that I would love to do. And it's a popular request. So I don't have any announcements yet saying here's what we're doing along those lines, but it's on a piece of paper somewhere. It's definitely top of mind. It's something I'd love to do. I think a lot of people would like those. It'd be fun to do with those too. You know, I've thought of doing some that were specific to other manufacturers' equipment, but Cisco's just the big dog. It's the huge infrastructure. They're everywhere. So it would make sense to have some type of resource that would be along the lines of getting something like a CCNA, CCENT, that type of thing. It just makes sense for those. Do I ever encourage students to try and penetrate your system? No. You should never, ever do a scan, a vulnerability check, or other type of system to something that's not yours or that you do not have permission to do, because you will end up in jail somewhere. You will. It's not legal in the United States anyway, and other places around the world as well. Never encourage that. I wrote a book on Nmap. It's called, it's no longer published, but it's one that was called The Secret of Network Cartography, a comprehensive guide to Nmap. And the first thing in that book is don't scan somebody's network that you're not supposed to. And that's one that's incredibly important. Because you're attacking somebody, you're getting into those systems, you're adding to the problem of someone else's, and it doesn't matter if you are not being malicious. It doesn't matter if you have the best intentions whatsoever. Good for you. I hope you feel better about yourself, but it is something that is illegal. It's something that will be interpreted as an attack. There's no other way to interpret that but as an attack. And in fact, you kind of get into a weird political place. There have been times when someone has identified a very significant vulnerability on a website, has then perhaps used that vulnerability and then told the company with the website about the vulnerability, and that person has gotten into significant legal trouble. So it's not cut and dry about what is good and what is bad. Everything is always interpreted as bad. Always. It is very rarely considered to be you being a good person. If you do run into a scenario where you find a significant vulnerability of some kind on somebody's network, then there are ways to communicate to them of this problem. And most of the time I recommend tell them anonymously, hope they patch it, and forget about it. Don't even get involved in the intricacies unless you have a good lawyer and a lot of money. If you've got a good lawyer and a lot of money, do what you want. Who really needs any type of concern? But there is that horrible little problem of the legality of what you're doing and how a jury is going to interpret that. And you just don't know how that's going to go. So you have to be extremely careful in security about even doing things like an Nmap scan. And the problem is not necessarily that first Nmap scan. It's what you do after that point that really becomes the very significant issue that everybody's going to try to talk about during the trial about where your head was. And nobody's going to know the answer, but they're going to take a lot of guesses, and they're going to be either right or wrong or indifferent. Not what you want to be involved with. Well, that comes to the end of, wow, another study group. There was a lot of stuff in this study group. Remember that we have study groups every month. If you'd like to join us, you can always go out to my calendar, professormesser.com/calendar. But of course, I'm here all the time. So if you wanted to send me a message, you can go to my website and click the Contact Us link at the top. Maybe it'll be a contact at the bottom. Depends on where I put it, but you'll find it. It's on the website. And there's also in the chat room on professormesser.com, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's always somebody in the chat room doing something, and I'm in there a lot as well. You can always ask your question there, and we'll try to answer it. So we'll see you next month on the study group. Thanks for attending, everyone. We'll see you then.